Welcome to this episode of the Partovi Effect. My name is Mrs. Madi Partovi.
And I'm Dr. Ryan Partovi.
We are going to take you on a ride today and introduce you to the Partovi world of food, why we eat what we eat. Beloved, why don't you start off with how we got here?
How we got here. Well, I'll tell the story of how I got here, and you can tell the story of how you got here. How about that? This may take a minute. So I have to give credit to my mom because she had a degree and went to school for home economics, which now is known as human ecology. Actually reissued her diploma with a new major on it. And a big part of that was nutrition. So something that she was always interested in, I think really from a pretty early age, was nutrition. And I grew up going with her to health food stores. We had the small town in East Texas where I was born and I lived the first 9 years of my life. There was only one health food store. But I would go with her and thumb through the books, and as we moved around, continue to do that. And it was something that was always part of the conversation. There was things that she taught me along the way and that I resisted, frankly, for the first, 19 years of my life. And then around age 19, I started experiencing my first health problems. And I think much of that was really as a result of me resisting my mother's nutrition advice and basically going to Wendy's and getting triple cheeseburgers and biggie fries and biggie Diet Coke and thinking I was doing good by having a Diet Coke, right? And not to mention the Frosty for dessert. So, lest anyone think that I have lived this sainted life of perfect nutrition my entire existence, let me disabuse you of that notion right now and just say that, yeah, it's been a journey for me. So, and frankly, I think because I'm a non-secretor, and we'll talk more about the secretor non-secretor difference, I'm sure, in one of the other installments of this series. But because I'm a non-secretor, my level of compliance, if I'm going to get the kind of outcomes that an average patient would get, I have to be like 98%, 99% compliant versus like an average patient secretor would be able to do 80% compliance and get the same result as I get at 99%. So I think because of that, we non-secretors we sort of are more of a canary in the coal mine. And because of that, I then started to get health problems at an earlier age. And so I, at the time, was going to school at my alma mater, the University of Texas at Austin. And there was a doctor locally. His name was Ron Manzanero. And I think he's still in practice, but I think he moved up to Arlington. Anyway, he was at the time the only MD that was doing integrative holistic stuff in the Austin area, if you can imagine that. And the doctor I was seeing at the student health center said, "Oh, you should go see this guy. I've met him at some of our local conferences. And I know he does other things," because I was dealing with a thyroid problem. And I asked her, I said, "What is going on with my thyroid? And why do I need thyroid hormone? I mean, people don't get fevers because they have an aspirin deficiency. I mean, how do I get this thyroid deficiency that now requires that I be on thyroid hormone?" And she was like, "Well, we don't really know. And if you want to find out more," I said, "Well, who could help me figure it out?" She said, "This guy." So I went to see him, and I had previously seen Dr. D'Adamo's book, Eat for Your Type, at the local bookstore. And I picked it up and I thumbed through it. I'm like, "Oh, blood type diet. This has got to be, there can't be anything to this." And I thumbed through it. I put it down. I said, sounds like bunk to me. And then I went to see this guy though that the doctor at the health center had recommended, Bronze Manzanero, and we did a bunch of lab work and he diagnosed me with insulin resistance and was evaluating my thyroid and all that kind of thing. And I noticed on his bookshelf was Eat Right for Your Type. And I said, "What's this Eat Right for Your Type?" And he said, "Well, here's the thing. I read it. It's scientifically sound," he said. "And I started following the diet last year when I was sick. And not only am I better now, but also," and he didn't get into the details, but he said, "I also lost 25 pounds in the process." So I said, "Okay, well, that sounds cool." So I went home and I said, well, yeah. And he said at the time, he said, look, you're a typo. You should try and avoid gluten. That's the biggest avoid for typos is avoiding wheat. So I said, okay. So I went home and I thought I was doing really good avoiding wheat. And I was sitting there about a month later having some graham crackers because, of course, graham crackers are made out of graham flour. That's what I had remembered learning in American history class that there were these, that Graham had created this graham cracker company with his religious followers at the time. And this is what they did is they were using graham flour to make these crackers. Anyway, obviously I was looking at the box and I was like reading the ingredients and I'm like wheat and other kinds of wheat. And I was like, what the heck? So I got really frustrated. I was like, I can't do this. This is too hard. And so I went back to him, Ron Manzanero, and he said, I really think you should try cutting out gluten because I just wasn't getting any better. And so I said, okay, I'll give it another try. So I went through and I went home and specifically he again recommended I check out the blood type diet. So I went home, I put everything containing gluten in a box. I read the label. This is the beginning of my label reading here at 19. Put everything in the box that had any bit of gluten in it, gave it to a friend of mine. And then I bought a copy at the time of Live for Your Type, which was Dr. Diodamo's second book and was the one written for more of a medical scientific background, people who had really were interested in science. And that was me. I was at the time a biology major. So, or I had been a biology major, but then I was majoring in history. It's a long story. But anyway, I ended up reading that and I sat down for what I call my last ignorant meal. And I remember vividly what it was. It was salmon and like a yogurt with some cucumber in it, which I'm not supposed to eat, and then some orzo pasta, which I'm not supposed to eat. And that was at Central Market in Austin. So I sat down and I had that meal and I started reading Live Right for Your Type, and it was like, wow, it opened up this whole new world of nutrition for me and understanding and making connections between sort of the way that I had wound up in life and all of the strengths and susceptibilities that I'd already started to notice as I'd gone down this health journey and how it all fit into this blood type paradigm in a really beautiful way. But that was just the beginning. And then as I adhered to the nutrition plan for the next, well, over the course of the next year, I ended up losing 50 pounds. My energy bounced back. I mean, all the health problems I was dealing with, my insulin resistance improved, really resolved at that time. It's since come back, damn you, med school. But anyway, the point is that was a really watershed event that sort of revived my health in a way at that age of 19. So that by the time I was 23, I ended up attending the first, it was at the time called the Blood Type Diet Conference. It was the first Blood Type Diet Conference. And this was in 2003. And it was at Southwest College of Naturopathic Medicine, which eventually became my alma mater. And I was there. I actually met Dr. Diodamo and Mrs. Diodamo for the first time. And really, I remember at the end of the conference, I shared with him that I really saw him as a mentor. And he said to me that he was really moved by that and he really appreciated that and it meant a lot to him. And that really began a beautiful relationship, which continued on. And I think ultimately, in many ways, culminated in my residency after med school, because I continued to attend what eventually became the Institute for Human Individuality. It was no longer the Blood Type Diet Conference, it was the Institute for Human Individuality conference. And typically we would have them every other year. And throughout the 2000s, that was the pattern until I think the last one that was in that pattern was 2011. And 2 years I would go and I would sometimes move heaven and earth to go and continue to learn. And I learned about SWAMI, which is the software that we use now, that where we are pulling together not just blood type, not just secretor status, which I've touched on, but also many other 200 variables, genetic, epigenetic, which are like the volume control settings on the genes, family health history, personal health history, presenting symptoms, lab data, biometrics, which are measurements of the body. We put all of those into this software and it performs over 12 million calculations and generates an individualized nutrition plan, recipe book, meal planner for that person where they are right now on their health journey. So I was one of the first people to receive a SWAMI. I was also one of the first people to learn how to use a SWAMI, the software. And the SWAMI stands for serotyping with advanced modifying inventories, I believe it's not a easily memorable thing, but the SWAMI part is very memorable. And that really began the concept in my mind as well around that time. It was at 2005 where Dr. Diadamo introduced even the concept of epigenetics, because at the time, genetics was really popular and the blood type diet was the first genetic diet. It was the first nutrigenomic diet. And adding in the secretor status, another gene, right? So still in that realm of nutrigenomics. But in terms of epigenetics, like the volume control settings on the genes, Diadamo really introduced that to common parlance, in my view, at least anyway, at least for me, in 2005. And starting there, it opened up the realm, which eventually he ends up exploring, I think, more fully in his 2009, I want to say, book, which at the time was the Genotype Diet. It's since been the name changed to Change Your Genetic Destiny, which is the idea that what we're eating can actually alter the course of our sort of health span and our life through turning on certain genes, turning off certain genes, turning down or up the volume on certain genes. And that's really a lot of the power and promise of naturopathic medicine, generally speaking, but I think in personalized nutrition in particular, is it has that capacity to alter gene expression and literally remake who you are as a person over the course of 7 years, right? Because all of our cells turn over within a 7-year period. So if you are what you eat and all of your cells are turning over within 7 years, then within 7 years, you can literally remake yourself. And there's some limitations on that. It's not completely strictly true, accurate down to the smallest. Because so what happens is, and I'll just briefly explain this and then we can get on to your journey, is there is a plastic phase really starting from about 6 months prior to conception all the way up through about 18 months. And then you have like a semi-plastic stage, which continues until the child is about, I think it's 3 to 5 years. And then there's a little bit of plasticity until about 16 years old. And then pretty much you're in the post-plastic phase. So your genes are pretty much dialed in terms of what portion of that gene is available for expression. So the way I explain this to patients is, hey, look, imagine when you're conceived that you've got a volume dial that can go from 0 to 100 on every gene. But over the course of your life, as you're exposed to different environmental factors, the portion of that volume dial that's available to you narrows. So maybe by the time you're born, it's 0 to 50, a particular gene, right? And then by the time you're 16, maybe it's now only 20 to 40 that you actually have access to. But then within that 20 to 40, we can use nutrition to dial it up or dial it down. But beautiful thing is within each generation, we actually have the ability to alter that by at least 10%. And so the cool thing is that theoretically anyway, within 4 generations, if I can have a family within 4 generations and alter their nutrition pattern and bring it in alignment with their optimum health and well-being, we can eliminate chronic disease within 4 generations. That's the fundamental promise and principle driving generative medicine, which is the specialty that was created by Dr. Diadamo. And when it was time for me to do my residency, and I went through a bit of a crisis of faith regarding being in medicine in particular, because I started in conventional medical school, I think primarily because I really had the vision of I really have to live in Texas. That's where my family was at the time. And I couldn't imagine living anywhere else because I'd grown up there. So because there was no naturopathic licensure in Texas, I said, well, I need to become a conventional medical doctor and then I can learn about all the rest of this. But because I sort of knew too much, that really didn't work for me. I got to the point where I was in we can talk more about this, and we may have actually in our first episode, but I got to this inflection point where I had a conversation with Dr. Diadamo, and really I was going to get out of medicine entirely, or I was going to go to naturopathic medicine. So that's what I did. And he really helped inspire me in that conversation. And so then I went to Southwest College of Naturopathic Medicine, where at the time we had the Center of Excellence in Regenerative Medicine. And then, oh no, is what was it called? The Institute for Human Individuality Center of Excellence, I think. And then in the by the time I graduated, Dr. Diadamo said, well, sorry, Ryan, I'm not taking any more residents. So I said, okay, well, we'll see. And I waited a few months, and then I sent him this email in which I outlined my vision for the residency and how I'd like it to go and what I saw was possible, which is that we could actually create a specialty inside of naturopathic medicine through this residency program that we could create. And he was so enrolled by that he not only said yes to the residency, but also wrote a white paper for a new Center of Excellence in Regenerative Medicine at the University of Bridgeport College of Naturopathic Medicine. And then that inaugurated the next over decade, really, of Dr. Diadamo's involvement with University of Bridgeport, which really only came to a conclusion when the new head of that school the new head of the University of Bridgeport decided to axe the naturopathic medicine program, which I think is pretty tragic because it was, I guess, other than the school in Toronto, it was the only school in the United States anyway on the East Coast, what we used to call the Wild East of naturopathic medicine, because most of naturopathic medicine's historic sort of base of influence is on the West Coast. So this was sort of the outpost, and Dr. Diadamo was very influential in shaping and supporting that over the last decade, and ultimately came up against a university administrator who just didn't get it. So, but through that residency, I became the first resident in generative medicine and really spawned an education program that continued to educate and train people in the bioinformatics platforms that Dr. Diadamo had developed, including really all the Datapunk platforms, including Opus 23 as the main one, I would say, which is the genomic analysis platform that he created, was really the first one that allowed for, typically most genomic analysis platforms, for people who are aware of it, are going to look at maybe 20 genes, maybe up to 100. But this was the first platform to look at basically all the health actionable genes and also allow the users to provide feedback and context and clinical data that would then inform future clinicians. So it was sort of the first sort of crowdsourced genomic platform, and it's still the best in my opinion. So yeah, I mean, and then I ended up finishing my residency and moving out to San Diego, where I met Madi, starting my practice there, and been on a mission to make a difference in the lives of people and really share this information. And to this day, I mean, Dr. Diadamo's work forms the foundation of my practice. And I guess I skipped the part where in med school, I ended up gaining that 50 pounds back. But then when I went into residency and I started working with Dr. Diadamo, it was really like a revival for me and an opportunity to get healthy again, which I did. I lost the weight again and tighten up the diet. And actually, there was this confusion in the lab where, because I had blood in my saliva, they thought I was a secretor, and it turns out I was a non-secretor, and that can happen when you're doing saliva testing. And anyway, once I was able to get on the non-secretor diet, that made a huge difference for me, and it still does to this day. So, yeah.
So you know how it's not an episode unless I cry. So I was moved during multiple points of your story. And I'm present to your profound connection to Peter. And I'm also present to that anything is possible in a conversation, and how you enrolled him. We can create this.
Mhm.
And so here's this new possibility for people, for humanity that you created out of saying, okay, you didn't take no for an answer.
Yeah, well, my concern was to create a legacy for him. I wanted him to have a legacy that lived on for him. And I think, now I'm not going to take credit for this, but I do think that inside of him creating that specialty and that center of excellence, his youngest daughter, Emily, was actually enrolled in, I want to be a naturopathic physician, because I think when I first met her, she was interested in being uh, an international law attorney. That was her initial interest. But then I think because of the energy that came out of that center of excellence, she was like, no, I want to do this too. And yeah, so now he has a literal legacy through his daughter, which to transmit as well. But also all of those of us who trained with him and who are part of the specialty society can carry on his work forward long after he's gone. So it's pretty exciting, and that's what I wanted. I didn't want, to me, the greatest possible tragedy would have been for his work to end with him. That would have just been absurd to me. So I think we've secured a future in which that's not going to happen. And yeah, I feel honored and humbled to be a part of that. And yeah, well, and I think the part I didn't say, and also in just talking about, I skipped over at the end because I said I moved to San Diego, sort of my practice. But I mean, what I am also present to is that Dr. Diadamo's work saved my mom's health. I mean, she was having horrible health problems when she started the blood type diet, and then it just eliminated them. She was having horrible gut issues, constipation, and other stuff. And then as I started using it clinically with patients, just seeing people that would come in after 3 months, and I'd be like, you look vaguely familiar, but I don't, it's because they lost like 30 pounds in 3 months, which is not typical. I'm not saying everybody's going to do that, but I mean, I've seen it. I've seen it multiple times. And just this amazing return of vitality that people experience when they really eliminate the foods that are not a match for them. And when they put in the foods, especially, and that's really the juice of the blood type diet, the secret weapon is the beneficials. It's not just, oh, this is what you need to avoid. It's what do I need to focus on? What do I need to make 60 to 75% of my nutrition on a daily basis? And I think that that's actually probably one of the biggest pitfalls, which I'm sure we'll get to that more. But I think that I've just seen such great outcomes over and over again. And also, to me, it makes sense. I understand how the diet works. I understand mechanistically. I always say that I either, for a treatment, for me to recommend a treatment to a patient, it either needs to have done wonders for me, or I need to be able to understand it and explain it in such a way that it makes sense to me, mechanistically, scientifically. And that's a baseline at a minimum. And I know that just because something's done wonders for me doesn't mean it's going to do wonders for somebody else. So that one I think is a bit weaker, and I'm not, I don't rely on it really. But being able to explain something mechanistically to me is that's my go-to. That's really what animates my practice. And I think having both of those be true in my case with Dr. Diadamo's work is what really lit me up around it and has me continue to share it to this day.
That's so beautiful. Thank you.
Sure. Sorry
Yes.
I cut you short
No, no,
there, but I
no, no,
realized
that was,
I left that out.
thank you. Thank you for that. Every word matters.
Mm.
Plus, it gave me a little bit of time to unravel and collect myself, and I'm still moved. Something really stood out about what you said about the 7 years.
Mm.
And I got something for myself that that's so distinct that I've never gotten before.
Okay.
Because I'm about 8 years in. I've been very coachable on the blood type diet. And
Well, you have a SWAMI.
not just that, but like I have the drilled down version and the very specific version that's made just for me.
Right.
And my genetics, my unique genetics. I used to deal with crippling anxiety. I feel a little vulnerable sharing this. Like all throughout my corporate experience, I would have moments where I would be so stressed and then I would feel so dysregulated and I couldn't breathe. It's like I was trying to catch a deep breath and I just couldn't breathe because I felt my chest and my heart just beating so fast. And I had these recurring moments where I just had to do everything I could or just calm myself down. And I also dealt with my right shoulder, and it's a specific spot that seized up and that yielded tremendous pain.
Mm.
So a lot of the time where I was doing my sales thing in a corporate, I put on a front, but I was really suffering inside and mentally and physically. So when you said that, I was looking back, like scanning back, like when was the last time I really dealt with that? It was before I met you, even during my yoga days, when I was doing yoga a lot and meditating, that I would still come up against moments where, oh gosh, I just felt so out of essence, like myself. And so it's before we met, and then you introduced this whole world. I had become aware of the blood type diet when I owned Yoga Monkey.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, this is so interesting because I was listening to an excerpt about it. And I think that it was big in the news because that was when Peter was on the news and talking about it. And
Well, there's a lot of the top trainers in Hollywood that use that with their clients.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was like this big secret that was
Yeah.
unleashed to the world. I'm like, okay. And it never really made its way into my life until I met you. And what stood out to me when you said about the 7 years was that when was the last time I experienced that in dysregulation and that I can't catch a deep breath? It's been a long time because the way that being on my SWAMI has really regulated me on a cellular level, balanced my hormones, supported me through pregnancy and birth 2 times, empowered me to get pregnant at 39 and 43 easily. I am I'm celebrating that. Like, holy, I am proud of myself because it was such a journey. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I was also so moved by your initial gratitude for your mom because I have a very similar story. Growing up, there was this on the wall was your health is your wealth, written by my mom in her beautiful, like, exquisite calligraphy.
Mm-hmm.
So I must have looked at that thing every single day of my life growing up.
I know at least one person listening to this who is gonna laugh at that. Dr. Margarita, that's her saying, loves that. Yeah.
Beautiful. And the way she would cook dinner every night. And we would have family dinners every night. And they were a protein, rice, and vegetable. Just be simplistic and nourishing. And I felt that looking back, I think I really thrived with that as my foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I moved away and went to college, I still experienced, I was able to approach like my world of food with equanimity, this wholeness, because I had been trained and developed all my life.
Mm-hmm.
And my journey with food is not perfect either. I remember when we were young, my brother and I would we would go to the movies and we would go out together and then we would buy this bounty of candy, right? And just So that was the wave, all this candy and all this junk food. And then we wouldn't do it for a while, but then we would do it again. I don't know how many iterations we had of doing that. And then one day I just told my brother, I can't do this anymore. Like, I am really keen to the impact that it has on my body and my brain. So what we did was we still continued our brother sister outings, and we invested in like top quality stuff. I would read ingredients and I would, okay, let's try this. I mean, it doesn't, this is a candy that doesn't have any dyes, and it's supposed to be sugar free, refined sugar free, and all these new foods that, that I normally wouldn't spend money on, right? But I'm okay. At this point in my life, my body deserves this.
Yeah.
And so that was a leading up to the time that
It's funny, you said new foods, and I'm thinking to myself, new old foods. Right? These are foods that they used the way they used to make them
yeah,
100 plus years ago.
whole foods, not processed, and with the conscious back packaging. And yeah, so that was a nice adventure. And I've shared before that the wisdom of my body really informs me on a lot of things, whether I am like out with myself or not in alignment with myself. The next expression.
She's a big creator.
Yes. Co-creator, with
Co-creator.
you,
Yes.
with God.
Yeah.
And so what would be the next expression of uh, everything that we just talked about, and handing it in a nice package, a gift to humanity? And it's going to be uh, an online course that we are going to record live for the first cohort. Your DNA, your diet. The future of personalized nutrition now.
Yeah. Well, what that really does is it invites people into the world that we've just created, right? It invites people to into the journey that we have been on and have undertaken. We've been on the journey, so you don't have to. You can come in where we are. You don't have to start from the very beginning. You can come in where we are and join us, continue from here, and
And
learn from everything that we've learned from. And
yes, and if
yeah.
you really take a moment to connect to it, like your own personal world of food, right? And there are many of us that are there are external factors that affect that. Like, you have this season of food coming up, all these indulgences throughout Thanksgiving, or wait, first start with Halloween, and everything that parents and kids are consuming starting in October, sliding into November. You got Thanksgiving and then those indulgences. And then boom, right into the holidays and then New Year's and then those indulgences. And then come the new year, you have a mass of people saying, okay, I'm gonna buckle up, button up, and change everything and work out and eat right. And how long does that really last?
I was
It's
just
such a big pendulum swing.
Yeah, I was just listening to Dr. Jordan Peterson talk about that. He says basically how it works is you go exercise one time and then you basically convince yourself very effectively about why you really don't need to keep doing that. Yeah, so
Yeah, I mean,
on average, probably once or twice people go and actually fulfill on it.
right. And then you have the world of fertility and infertility as well, and women and men constantly grasping for what is the perfect fertility diet. And it's not a one size fits all. It's really customized to your genetics. And what if this? So, what other world? Binge eating, emotional eating, people that are aware of what you're eating has an impact on your mental and spiritual and physical health. People that are dealing with fluctuations in weight, or that have been obese or overweight for a large part of their life, or their whole life. And no matter what they do, like even if they starve themselves, they don't lose any weight.
Yeah. Well,
So there's,
sometimes that just makes it worse.
yeah, so there's just this whole world of food. We all deal with it in our own way. And I will posit it again. Like, what if this equanimity and wholeness and a sense of peace and ease were available to you, presented with like a whole table of food? Like, you would be able to choose powerfully what is optimal for you, that really contributes to a life of aliveness and being present with yourself instead of at the effect of what you're eating. What if that was available to you? Like, how would it alter your life? Where would it make a difference for you? So that's my question and my invitation for our community. And I'm really lit up by starting. We're going to give you all the details. We'll likely start recording live in either late January or early February of 2025. And all the details will be coming out very soon. And also, our wellness plan patients, even though you have your SWAMI and you've been participating in your DNA, your diet, there is an extra level. You can participate in this online course as well, in the first recording of it for a special price, because we're also going to address the mental, emotional, and the spiritual commitment that it takes in order to have a complete transformation in your relationship with food.
Yeah. Well, and that brings up a really interesting point. I was talking with a patient this last week about the concept of the ideal diet for an individual. And then there's where they are right now and what they're eating right now. And that's maybe anywhere from a few yards to a few light years away from the ideal. And then there's sort of the point in between those 2 points where they're approaching the ideal and it's still a sustainable process for them. It's still a sustainable diet. And the way I was bringing this up in this particular patient call was as I was explaining to her that the closer that sustainable point is to the ideal, the fewer nutraceuticals that she would need to take or medications, et cetera, to make up the gap. The further away the sustainable point is from the ideal, the more nutraceuticals and maybe medicines she would need to take. But I think what you're pointing to is what is it that really determines where that sustainability point is? And truthfully, that is in it's in the realm of how food occurs for you, which ultimately comes back to how you're being about food and how you're being about eating and how you're being about everything related to how you nourish yourself. And a lot of that, you're right, does come from, at the end of the day, it's a choice, right? But a lot of the default way, a lot of the way we wound up with being about food comes from our childhood.
Which is not a choice.
Yeah, which is not a choice. But what I'm saying is that's something that can be what I think you're pointing to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I think you're pointing to is that also can be process that can be completed and
Yes.
which
Thank
can
you.
leave space for it to be a choice.
Yes. Yes. So we have this thing where we're very intentional about our language and very precise. I would call
Most
it
of the time,
most of the time.
except when I,
That's our commitment. That's
except
our commitment.
except when I'm making woo-woo jokes, obviously.
So I would call that a decision because the Latin root of decision is to kill off. And so, in order for you to be in a complete place of choice, you have to like know the whole entire buffet of options that you have. You didn't get my joke, my buffet joke?
No, I think I got it.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to know about the options you have, and you also have to unconceal or reveal that which is hidden from your view, that is in between you and, sticking with our analogy here of the ideal being the goal, what's in between you and having what is sustainable be as close to that as possible, or even closer to that, right?
Yes.
And I'm present to that in my own life. I'm
So
present to that
right.
in my own life, and I know you are too.
Yes.
So,
And we want to share this with
yeah.
as many people as possible and ride this wave, this global wave, really, of getting healthy again.
Well, I don't see it as riding the wave. I think we're making waves,
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
you
Oh,
know.
precision of language.
Yeah,
Yeah, so we ain't gonna wait for anybody to,
because there's no one coming.
there's no one coming. There's no cavalry coming. There's you. And this comes forth from our expression. What are we gonna do? How are we, like, what did JFK say? Ask
Oh,
how,
what your country can do for you, instead ask what you can do for your country. Yeah.
yes. So this is what we are going to do for our country,
Yeah. Yeah.
our community.
And our country
Yes,
and the
thank you.
world.
Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you for your generous listening. And this is the first part in a series of the Partovi World of Food. Thank you for joining us.
I'm Dr. Ryan Partovi,
And I am Mrs. Madi Partovi.
and this has been the Partovi Effect, creating the consensus. Thanks for joining us. Be well.